I love electric guitars, and I find the sound so intoxicating that I always put way too much. It's like oversalting your food, or, using too much ketchup or whatever. You can totally drown out the other good flavors in a mix just because you like one flavor too much.
Welcome to Recording Studio Rockstars. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is the podcast created to help you become a rock star of the recording studio. Hello, Rockstars. It's Lid Shaw, your host for Recording Studio Rockstars. I created this show to introduce you to real-world recording professionals, to hear their stories and learn from their experiences so that you can take your records to the next level and be a rock star of the studio yourself. My guest on the show today is Mr. Craig Alvin, a fantastically talented recording and mixing engineer, originally hailing from Portland, Oregon, before moving to Nashville, Tennessee. He's been making records for over 20 years and has an eclectic discography, having worked on several Grammy-nominated projects. His work spans from contemporary Christian music on the one end of the spectrum to cool pop and rock music on the other end. His credits include Amy Grant, Vanessa Carlton, Lady Antebellum, Frankie Ballard, Chase Rice, Will Hogue, The Features, Butterfly Boucher, Aaron McCarley, Hanson, and How I Became the Bomb, to name a few. I've known Craig for years as a badass magician of mixing that can take the tracks that I've recorded and make them sound like what I imagined they could sound like. He has long since mixed with a hybrid of digital and analog gear that brings the best of both worlds together to create a sound that is powerful and compelling. I'm really psyched to have Craig Alvin here with us on Recording Studio Rockstars. Craig, are you ready to rock, my friend?
Let's rock.
Awesome, dude. Welcome, man. Welcome.
Thanks.
So I've done an introduction. Can you tell us more in your own words about who you are and how you got to be here?
Yeah. I was born in Vancouver, Washington, which is right across the river from Portland, Oregon. My dad is a musician, a gospel singer. He had a band that started the year I was born and lasted, until last year.
Wow.
They toured all over, played with all kinds of gospel musicians all over the world. He now has a job where he sings. He does like crooner shows for like cruise ships or banquets or whatever. If you go through the Portland airport and you see an old guy singing, Frank Sinatra, that's probably my dad.
That's cool, dude.
Yeah.
So did you grow up with a whole lot of, just listening to gospel music and kind of old time stuff?
Yeah, I listened to a lot of gospel as a kid. But my parents also had a lot of pop music from their era. I remember a lot of Bing Crosby and Perry Como, those kinds of things. My parents liked the Osmonds.
Yeah. Were they Beatles fans too? I mean, did you grow up with that kind of sound?
I was raised in a very religious home. We had no TV, no radio. I wasn't allowed to go to movies. I was never allowed to go to a dance. So, but there was a lot of music, and we were happy. So I don't really regret missing those
no
things.
Radio, but you guys are listening to vinyl records or something.
Yeah, we had our own records at home, but I mean, it was my parents' music. It wasn't for me. Anything for me was just like a children's record. I remember Sesame Street.
Do you remember
records.
Free to Be Me, You and Me? Do you remember that album? That was probably a little too progressive.
Yeah, it probably was. That's hippie stuff.
It's definitely hippie music. One of the tracks was called Willie Wants a Doll.
Yeah, right. That wouldn't have made it in my home.
All right, cool. So, Craig, share with us an inspirational quote, something that will inspire listeners to want to go make records right now.
Yeah, I was thinking about this, and earlier this week, I was working over at Starstruck Studios on the Row, and someone had taken a fortune cookie, fortune, and had taped it to the console, and it said, "You hear with your ears, but you listen with your heart."
Oh, man, that's sweet.
Isn't that? But it's great. I remember I used to work at a studio called Supernatural Sound, and Joe Chiccarelli came in to do a record there, and I was assisting on it. And I remember looking at him and going like, what is he doing? Because he would stop and listen and be so still and intense. And I didn't realize that, like I was hearing all the things, I was hearing the compression, I was hearing the EQ he's putting on things, all that. But he wasn't really listening to those things. He was actually listening to what his emotions were telling him. And that was how he was finding the right sound. And it took me a long time to really settle into being able to do that, to listen to how it makes me feel rather than to think about technically about what I was doing.
I had forgotten that you spent all that time working with Joe Chiccarelli. So
we did a few records together, and I really learned a lot about audio engineering and production from him.
So let me introduce Joe just a little bit. I know him as somebody who early in his career worked with Frank Zappa, and I believe he did Apostrophe, which was like one of the most important records for me growing up. And then more recently, he did, was it Consolers of the Lonely for the Raconteurs? Was that his album?
Yeah, he worked on that. I mean, he did a lot of stuff with Jack White.
So, but you were an assistant with Joe, right? And I remember now that you brought that up, that you had some awesome stories about that experience and about, tell us the story about the time when you were kind of sitting in the back of the room while he was mixing and he turned around to you and was like, get up to the console.
Oh yeah. He was working and he really expected all of us who were working with him and for him to be very mindful and attentive of everything that was going on. We weren't allowed to take a break. Like there were no smartphones, you know.
You weren't in the back of the control room just reading a magazine when you weren't doing something.
What happened was that I'd gotten up to use the restroom, which was okay. But when I came back into the room, there was, I remember it was EQ magazine was sitting on the couch where I wanted to sit. So I picked it up and I sat down, and the couch was close enough that I could keep an eye on what he was doing. That was fine. But I had picked up the magazine, and just for a second, I looked at the cover and started to read the cover. And he turned around so fast, and I'm not going to repeat what he said.
He said, I'm not on that cover. What are you looking at it for?
No, he was so mad that I was reading a magazine.
Wow.
That I think his exact words were that were unprofessional bullshit.
Wow, that's so cool that, I mean, on the one hand, you could hear that for the first time and think, whoa, that dude, what an asshole or something. But on the other hand, you realize that he was so dedicated to making records. Yeah. And he was dedicated to you, man. He did it for me. If he didn't give a crap about you as an assistant, he wouldn't have taken the time to tell you that.
I love the fact that he never once considered my feelings. He never once considered my feelings. He knew that in order to be good at this, that I was going to have to be disciplined. And disciplined not by him, but disciplined in my own mind, in my own practices. That if you're going to be good at doing this, you have to pay attention and you have to work hard all the time. You just can't sit on the couch and read a magazine.
So what are some of the things that you have learned to develop in your own process that equal your own personal discipline and your own attentiveness to the process of making records?
Oh, man, lately I have started doing something because I'm working alone most of the time. That's kind of the unfortunate reality for most mix engineers now, is that we go to a room by ourselves and work on music by ourselves. And that's really difficult. Music is meant to be shared and experienced as a group. Yeah. So when you're by yourself, it's foreign, it's alien. There's no one to share it with. So I'm pretty sure a
lot of our listeners know exactly what that feels like as home studio musicians.
Yeah. I mean, at times you can kind of get into it and not realize that you're alone. But I think the hardest part of the day is starting, getting started. And I have developed a technique which I think proves I am going a little crazy, but that really works. And that is, I start a conversation with the song.
Wow.
So when I pull up the song, rather than, going this stupid engineer didn't know how to record a snare drum, I'll go to the song. I'll say to it, how's your snare drum sounding today? And it's like, we can do better than that. And then I'll, I'll listen and go, did they give you anything in the bridge to make this better? Like, there's no energy. Why are you feeling so down?
Why are you feeling so low? Yeah.
Yeah. So I know it sounds stupid, but it keeps me in a positive mindset and thinking on the thing I'm supposed to be thinking about, which is the song. And the song should be speaking back to me, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
That's a necessary skill in listening. I know this sounds stupid, but once you've been sitting in the same room for 8 years mixing by yourself, you have to develop some ways to trick yourself into thinking that you're working on music with people.
Yeah, conversations with songs.
Yeah.
That's cool, man. So,
I really do that.
now, I know you've also had assistants in the past, interns. Is that still part of your process, or has technology sort of removed them from the space you're in? You know, are you getting assistance from somebody who's Dropboxing stuff to you, for example?
Not really. I'm doing everything myself these days, just mainly because it's really tough to maintain a full like console, analog, studio, Pro Tools, upgrades, all that, and make ends meet. So it was purely just a financial decision that once I took on management and they, started helping me out on that side, that I would kind of have to, in order to make up for that, I would have to start doing everything myself.
Yeah.
But I mean, it was a good trade-off. My management does an excellent job of, scheduling and negotiating and billing and all that stuff for me, which was a huge drain on my time and energy anyway. So I was able to kind of, pick up the slack in the studio in order to save money.
Cool, man.
Yeah.
Well, so share with us a story for you about a time of real failure, in your career or in making an important record, particularly something that became a learning experience in the end,
I think that the thing that if I could go back and do differently would be I would not have stayed in a small market like Portland for as long as I did.
Interesting.
It was, I think I would have chosen much earlier to just move to Nashville and interned at a studio here rather than do it there. Because even though I'm thankful for everyone out there and, the people who taught me and my, friendships I made and all of that, I think I would have gotten there quicker had I come to a city like Nashville or, LA or New York and interned in a big studio. It just would have been a more efficient way of going about, getting to where I'm at.
Yeah, because you had aspirations to really do great things with your mixes, with your career, and you just felt like this was the place where you could interact with people on that level that you wanted to be at.
Yeah, and in one way, I kind of like the fact that when I landed in Nashville, I was already a fully developed, engineer, and that I could mix. Like, people were totally shocked when I showed up and I could mix. They thought that it was the strangest thing when this guy just suddenly appeared out of nowhere.
And he knew what he was doing.
Like, how can that be?
I remember feeling that way when I first met you.
It's funny, but so I guess maybe that was good. That worked in my favor. But honestly, I think I would have moved here at least 4 or 5 years sooner.
Yeah. Okay, so now our listeners, rock stars, are listening to this from all around the world. Would you advise everybody to move to Nashville, or if there are people that maybe aren't going to be moving to the city, but yet they still want to advance their career, what advice do you have?
They already had.
What advice do you have to somebody who maybe is in a smaller market, but maybe they're not going to move to Nashville, New York, and LA, but maybe they didn't need to move their mindset towards, out of small time and into a larger.
Well, I don't know. I mean, nowadays, the tools that are available now to learn how to do this and to do it well are totally different than when I started. When I started, digital was really not a thing. There was digital recording, but it was not commonplace.
Right, and you couldn't have a full-on studio of your own like you can now in a living room.
Yeah, there was no internet. Larry Crane was just starting Tape Op magazine. I met him when issue number 1 came out. I met him at Powell's Books.
It was just a Xerox zine that was folded over and stapled.
Yeah, I still have all those. So he was just kind of getting started, And so the only place you could go to learn about recording really was Mix Magazine. We had, there was Mix, there was EQ, there was Recording and Electronic Musician. And then you had the British magazines too.
But so now we have a whole lot more at our fingertips.
Yeah, and the technology. I mean, back then when I wanted to start a studio, I had to come up with money to, I actually had developed quite a collection of guitars, amps, and pedals. And when I wanted to start a studio, I had to sell all that so I could afford to buy a 2-inch 24-track and a console.
Wow.
So, and that was my first home studio, was a 3M M79 out of Motown and a Neotech Series 1.
Wow, man, that's a serious investment back then. And did you have your own home to do this in? Did you do it in your parents' house or something like that, or what?
I was renting a little cabin, which was on the top of a mountain that used to be a fire lookout cabin. And there was a one-car garage that was built on the property. And I just ran a snake, from the garage through a bedroom window into the cabin.
Can we get a drawing of that and make a T-shirt out of it? Because I like the sound of that. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it was great.
Well, so now share with us a success moment for you, a point along your career path where you are making a record where you were just like, holy shit, I did this. I just made it.
I don't know that I have one. I think,
or just a moment where you felt like you couldn't believe that it came together.
Here's the frustrating thing about this question, and that is, I have records that I've worked on that have won awards, that have been hits in various markets, that have been nominated for Grammys, and none of them are records that I really love, or that I'm proud of, or that I have on my demo reel. The records that I've made that I'm really proud of tend to go unnoticed. And the ones that I go back and listen to over and over again, like Ryan Lindsay's White Paper Beds is one of my favorite records I've ever worked on. Ren Anderson's Heartache in a Song. Erin McCarley, her first record that I worked on. And these records are really, really great. Another one, Among Savages.
Mm-hmm. Oh, he's great.
Peter Barbie. Yeah. That record, I listen to it still and just go, the whole thing was brilliant. And I'm so proud of it. And nobody has heard it. Oh, another one, Andrew Bell, Black Bear. Again, it's like a few people know who he is.
Yeah. Well, and so Rockstars will include, as you can imagine, I'll include links to all these in the show notes too, so that you can click right through and follow him. I know Peter Barbie, for example, Among Savages, there's an amazing black and white video for that, and I'll include all that. So you're talking about the disconnect sometimes between the music that we work on that gains recognition from other people versus the music that we work on that is truly resonates with your own heart and passion for music. So talk a little bit about that. I mean, is that something that should we forget about all that music that we like and just focus on the stuff that gets written up in magazines? How important is it to create records that are meaningful to you?
I'm always going to go for the records that are meaningful, and maybe that's a problem. I do some records that are simply because I need to pay the rent. But I think you should always strive to do meaningful work. I think that this brings up an interesting problem that we have right now in the music industry, though, and this applies to artists. I think especially in Nashville, this is the case. But it applies to artists, it applies to producers, it applies to mix engineers, and that is we have a listening deficiency going on right now. People, they believe the hype machine, they believe the rumor mill, but they don't spend the time to be diligent and just go listen to everything.
Which is ironic because all you have to do is open Spotify and you can listen to a larger library than any of us could ever possibly listen to in our lifetime anyway.
And the other thing is that we're so quick to make a judgment and spout our opinion. And I'm guilty of this too, I have to admit. But we're so quick to do it. And most of my favorite records I didn't like on the first listen. It took me a while to understand it, for it to sink in. I remember the first time I tried Thai food, I thought it just tasted like soap, and then next thing I know, I'm like every
like,
week,
wow, soap
I'm like,
really
I just
tastes
want
good.
I want Thai food, I love it. But it was so foreign to me the first time I had it. I didn't understand it. And then after a while, it just became part of my regular diet.
So my experience with that, the first time I noticed that was Big Star #1 record. A friend turned me on to it. I listened to it and I was like, why are you so excited about this music? It's sort of loose and sloppy or something. And then I listened again and I listened again. And now it's one of the most incredible records I've ever heard. It just resonates with me. Another one would maybe be the Beatles.
Yeah.
Growing up, I thought the Beatles was just like, I want to hold your hand. And I kind of forgot about it. I moved to Nashville and all of a sudden I met these people that thought the Beatles were the most incredible thing. And I went back and revisited it and it took me a minute and then it clicked,
Yeah.
So I understand what you mean. Well, so tell us about the stuff you're excited about right now. What's going on in your world that you're just sort of psyched to go into the studio every day?
Well, honestly, I feel like I'm getting by with something, because I still get to do this. And that's rare, for a guy like me, who has a studio with the console and, outboard and all that. I think it's just amazing that people trust me with their music. But I think one of the things I'm most excited about is that I'm working with a production team called Analog Heart that does all instrumental music, and we do it for licensing for film and video. And it's refreshing. The arrangements are great. The recordings are great. We get to be creative, and we don't do it for the normal music business. Like nobody on the row is involved at all. We just do it for ourselves and we put it out there and then people license it and we make money. And to me, that's a wonderful thing because we have very few rules and it's just, everything doesn't have to be loud and in your face or whatever. It's meant to go with picture. So it's subtle and I get to work in subtlety, which I don't often get to do in
right. So
pop
it sounds
music.
Instrumental music can be sort of expressive and you don't have to deal with a vocal out front.
Yeah, exactly. And it's so different mixing without that vocal because you notice everything that's going on in the soundstage.
Yeah, I imagine it's more painterly.
Yeah, you can. You have way more freedom to express yourself in these mixes because there's so much going on and the arrangements are so intricate. It takes a great deal of concentration.
I'm still going here. It's more like doing a landscape than a portrait.
It is, yeah. It is.
All right. So tell us a little bit about your studio. Now, you have a console and you also use Pro Tools. Can you talk about the things? I mean, you don't have to necessarily get too specific, but talk about the things that you appreciate about both those and how you incorporate them all into your process.
Yeah. I have a Harrison Series 12.
And is that a new console? Is that an older one?
It's about 20 years old. It's analog, but it's digitally controlled analog. So every parameter on the console is recallable and automatable. So it's sort of like having the Pro Tools mixer, but in analog form.
So the EQ knobs can turn on their own? The faders can move up and down on their own?
Yeah, everything can be automated on that console, including routing and stuff that you could never dream of doing on a 4000 or
an SSL.
Yeah. So I really love that board. It has a great sound. The EQs are one of the best I've ever heard, and I love the mix bus. It sounds open and wide, and when you hit it, it has teeth. It doesn't get squishy.
It doesn't kill the sound. It gives it a little more.
Yeah,
bite.
It just gives it some life and some bite.
Do you feel like at this point, like you've learned all the tricks that the console can do and you know all those tools, or are you still discovering them? And how long have you been mixing through that console?
I've been mixing through the console for about 7 years now. And there is definitely a lot more that it can do, that it has functions I just don't need. My method is that I have the same setup every time. I have all my outputs labeled. They come up to a certain spot on the console. Console is labeled. It never changes. and I have all my outboard gear set so that I'm either running out of Pro Tools through the outboard gear, or I'm sending to the outboard gear either from Pro Tools or from a send or a bus on the console. So, and the reason I do that is that my outboard gear is fixed in position. I don't change it. And I know that people think that that doesn't sound creative, but I actually view it the other way around. It allows me to be more creative because I'm not having to run back and forth and always, wonder, is the stay level exactly in the same spot? Oh, what about my 1176s? Are they exactly in the same spot? I can vary how much or how little compression I'm using, either by how hard I hit it or how much I blend in at the fader. And then the other processing I do is all in Pro Tools. So, and I like this setup simply because it sounds good. It recalls quickly. I have to compete with guys who mix totally in the box. And as an analog guy, I want to be able to recall mixes just as quickly as they do. So, it limits me a little bit, but I think limitations are good too.
Yeah. So to bring back the painter analogy, when you have a compressor like an 1176, you just think about it like it's the color blue, and you're just going to add some blue to your mix instead of thinking like it's a whole spectrum of colors.
Yeah, yeah.
And so to reiterate that, you can just take a sound from Pro Tools, send it over to the piece of outboard gear, send more or less of it, and it sort of affects how that piece of gear sounds. And then that piece of gear comes back to the console and it's included in the mix.
Yeah, and it's on a fader. So I can either, put a little bit of it in, I can put a lot of it in. It runs parallel. So I can do a little or a lot, or I can automate it on the console to be, say out in the verse, but in the chorus. I have a lot of control that way over how I use it.
Okay, so share with us some of your favorite effects or pieces of outboard gear. What are 4 pieces of outboard gear that find their way into a lot of mixes?
Okay. Well, these all end up in every mix. To varying degrees, most of these end up in most mixes.
Until next week when you change your mind and have
exactly.
a whole new thing.
Distressors, that's an obvious one.
Okay, and a distressor, I'm going to reiterate some of these for people who don't know these items. So the distressor is a super versatile compressor.
Yes.
And that's very interesting because that one truly is an entire spectrum of colors. Yes. Do you use it in kind of like a gentle compression mode, or do you use it in its nuke mode or something like that?
No, I have them set up as parallels for my kick and snare. That's a trick I picked up from Joe Chiccarelli.
And they just sort of they give you that punch.
Yeah, I think of it as like on kick, it gives me a solid punch sound that I can like bring up, and on snare, I have it pretty squishy so that I can vary the length of the snare.
Right.
So if I want a snare to have more of a ring to it, I can bring that up, and it gives it more of that.
And again, that's a parallel send, so that's coming up on its own fader.
Yes.
And you can blend it in.
So I can blend in as much or as little as I want.
So now, if a Rockstar doesn't have the actual distressor box, they might have the new distressor plugin, for example, and they might be able to
do that,
mimic that in the computer.
Or any compressor that sounds distorted and crunchy or squishy or whatnot.
Okay, awesome. What's the next one?
I have an AKG BX10 spring reverb that I am absolutely in love with. It's the only reverb I've ever found where I can drown a vocal in reverb and people still think it's dry.
Wow.
And it does just this wonderful thing where, you can just pour it on, but it remains somehow like it connects so perfectly to the vocal that they think you haven't done anything. And I know that there's the BX20, which is the bigger version, and I've tried those and used them and think they're wonderful. I like the BX10 better for lead vocals because it doesn't sound like a BX20. It's somehow darker and blends better with a vocal.
Okay. What's the next one?
Gates stay level.
Gates stay level. Okay.
I bought my stay level back around 1990, 91 from a guy in Portland for $50. Nice. I then traded it to C6 Steve, who at the time was not C6 Steve. He was just Steve who worked at Moon Music in Olympia. And then he used it for about a year and then traded it back to me for a microphone that he wanted.
Didn't he have a cameo on SpongeBob for a little while too? Or
Oh, that guy's everywhere.
I'm just making that up. I apologize. I actually don't know C6 Steve, but I want to.
You've had Vance Powell in here, though, and Vance records his records.
Okay, great.
So,
cool.
Yeah.
Cool.
So anyway, that thing has been on every lead vocal of every mix I've done since about 1996.
And so, again, you send to it, you bring it back on a fader.
Yes.
It adds so the stay level has a quality that it just, the vocal level is just there and it's not going anywhere, right? It just sits it in one place and you can blend it in.
Yeah. I mean, and again, this is on a parallel bus, so I blend it in. But, and I usually am hitting it pretty good, at least -10, but up to -30, depending on the vocal. But I just love how it brings a creamy quality to it. It's been with me since I started. I actually I got it before I was even doing records. I was playing bass in a band, and I wanted a tube compressor, and I couldn't find an LA2A. So I talked to this guy, and he's like, "Oh, I've got a tube compressor," and he sold it to me for $50. So score.
So Rockstar, as a reminder, when Craig's talking about -10 and -30, don't think quieter, think louder.
Yeah.
Because you take that compressed signal and you bring it up and it actually makes it more in your face.
Yeah.
All right. So how about one more thing that you love to send off and include in your mix?
I have a Neve 33609 that lives on my drum bus, and that compressor can do no wrong. It really can't. It doesn't matter how hard you hit it. Just running through it makes things sound better.
Yeah. I remember doing a shootout of different stereo compressors at one point, and I had a lot and they all sounded great, but a lot of them seemed to almost make it sound as if it was playing back through something else. And the 33609 was the one that just seemed to sound open and transparent and punchy and just kind of made everything bigger and
it sounds like Neve.
Come towards me,
Yeah, it is that sound that I associate with really great Neve gear,
So if you're listening and you're thinking about getting a 33609, just cancel your vacations for the next couple of years and get one. All right. Yeah. So Craig, here's an important follow through to those questions. And it's just simply this. So people listening, when they hear all those items, do they have to rush out and get those, or do they have to copy those exact settings in a plugin? How did you arrive at those sounds?
Okay. This is a really good question because for years, as I was working and mixing, I would be working in studios that were not my own and eventually got my own. But that meant I had to take meticulous notes on everything. And every studio I would go to was different. They had different outboard gear, different console, different monitoring. And what I started to notice was that over the years, when I would really get a mix right, when it would be really, really right, and I went back and looked at the notes, all the same gear was in the same places at the same settings, doing the same things. So I started to sort of distill that down to go like, well, what is the stay level doing on the lead vocal when the lead vocal sounds really, really good? How much of it have I blended in? How hard is it hitting the console? Why when I set up the bass to have a parallel VCA compressor running through a Pultec with the 100 hertz all the way up, why does that sound better when I blend it in at this exact level, hitting, doing these things? And I have like all these things that I would try. I would, talk to other engineers. I would read articles and get information that way. And sometimes I would just get creative and try. And, I would find these techniques that I found that when I repeated these certain things, I got a certain result. And so I started to build a template based on all of these things, which is why I can now have a studio where a knob never turns on the outboard gear.
So it's really an empirical process, right?
Yeah. It took me a long time to come to this, but I can show you, like I have notebooks from, several years where when I was working in my studio and, fussing with things and turning knobs and all that, how, look, this mix sounds really good. And you'll notice that all the settings are the same settings I'm using today. And this mix here didn't turn out so hot. And you'll notice that I strayed from the path, and the formula. And I don't want to make it sound like, I don't want people to think that every mix I do sounds the same, because they don't.
You just discovered that if you tuned your guitar before you played it, it always sounded better.
Yeah. I mean, really, that's what it comes down to, is that truly it comes down to this. Engineering 101, if you're studying audio engineering, gain staging is everything. And what I've found is that when I gain stage certain pieces of gear in certain ways, I can then start to get this effect where I have optimized everything. And I start off every mix by getting my low end set. I set my kick drum, and then I set my bass guitar, and they always hit the console at the loudest part of the song. They always hit at the exact same place on the meter. I've got my meters set to peak program, and that way I know the actual peak level that they're hitting at, because VU is a little sloppy.
Right.
You don't quite know.
And so again, rather than you telling us some numbers right now on the podcast as if they could be replicated somewhere else, what about the process of knowing? Again, you said it was through lots of mixes, but how do somebody who's listening, they're like, okay, so I got to find that sweet spot for the loudest part of my low end. And then what? What do I do to judge that it's right?
Once you have set that, then you start, and that that's like where your low end sits best. And you have your system in place. You've got your compressors, your EQs, and you have those sounds where you like them.
And you might judge that based on your favorite listening playback system.
Yeah,
right?
and
until you're like,
of course,
this sounds great to me.
Yeah, it all depends on what style you're working on. I would make a bass guitar sound very different for a country song than I would for like if it's a folk record or a jazz record. There's a very different kind of sound for, your snare drum or your lead vocal, depending on the style. I'm not thinking about style, or I'm not talking about style. I'm always thinking about the audience that I'm mixing for. But I'm not thinking about that when I'm setting my gain staging, because this is something that's just boring that every audio engineer should do. I set my gain staging first. I do it with the low end first, because the low end requires the most amount of energy. So I go to the loudest part of the song, and I make sure that kick is hitting the same place where it should hit, so that my gain stage is right. Then I set my bass guitar to do the same exact thing at that part of the song. And then I start to build up the rhythm section around that, and those two don't change unless they go down. They can never go above it. They have to go down from there, because we've hit the optimum spot for the console.
So later on, if the kick and bass seem like they're not loud enough, you don't just reach over and make them louder.
No, I have the best trick in the world for this. Are you ready?
We're ready. We want to know the best trick in the world for kick and bass guitar.
So it happens every time where you get to the end of the mix and you realize that you're coming out of the bridge into the last chorus, and suddenly, oh no, I can't hear the kick drum or the toms anymore. Okay, so what you do is you take in Pro Tools. I'm going to tell you how to do it in Pro Tools. I can do it on the console because I have VCAs on my console. If you have an SSL, you have VCAs, so you can do that too. But in Pro Tools, I create a group, and I put everything in the group except for 4 things: kick, snare, toms, and bass. Those don't go in the group, but literally everything else goes in the group, and I call this group everything else. Got it? Now, what I do is I create a VCA for this group, voltage controlled amplifier. So in other words, I've already gone through and done the mix. I have all my moves and all my automation, but I want to be able to take everything else and control the volume with all that automation intact. So I create a VCA, and it allows me to change the level of everything together as a group and keep all my automation moves. So I grab the VCA and I go to the loudest part of the song and I turn it all the way to 0. So all I'm listening to is kick, snare, toms, and bass. And I close my eyes and I start to turn the VCA up. And when the mix gets really good, I make a mental note of where it's at, close my eyes again, and I turn it up until it gets bad. And then I find the sweet spot in between the two, and I leave it there.
And then that's where all those instruments live through the mix.
Yep.
That's brilliant, man. I love it.
Yep.
There's I did a webinar recently with Björgvin Benediktsson, and he was talking about what he called the 1 dB rule, which was a little similar in that it was take a sound, and if you're not sure where to go with it, like move it down a dB, move it down a dB until it's too low, move it up a dB, move it up a dB until it's too high, and then find that sweet spot,
Yeah.
That's great advice.
Yeah. The other thing I do to help with that is, and this is a technique I just developed in the last year, is that when I mix, I put electric guitars in last.
Mm-hmm. And
the reason why is that I love electric guitars, and I find the sound so intoxicating that I always put way too much. It's like oversalting your food, or using too much ketchup or whatever. You can totally drown out the other good flavors in a mix just because you like one flavor too much.
That's fascinating. So for you guys, for rock stars, it might not be guitars. You might, even if you're doing EDM, it might be like some particular sound in the mix. If you're doing acoustic folk music, you might like the vocals so much. Whatever it is in your mix that is your favorite thing, save that for last so that you don't overdo it too much.
And the reason why I talk about electric guitars is because they carry so much mid-range energy that they tend to easily overpower things like vocals and snare drums or any kind of articulation you have that you need in other instruments. So for me, it's definitely that, because it is so mid-range heavy, and plus I've always just been a fan of rock.
Yeah, and you can always just do a guitar up mix at the end if you need more rock and roll.
Yeah.
All right, so Craig, I know you are pretty brilliant when it comes to drums and recording and mixing drums.
Thank you.
And you've told me some stories in the past.
I struggle with it every day.
Well, you're doing it right. So you've told me in the past about the importance for you of understanding the drum kit and really beginning there. Can you talk about what that means to you and that whole process of really capturing great sounding drums?
Yeah, there is a video online at Artist House Music. I actually have like a series of videos I did like 8 years ago, and one of them in particular is on recording drums, so you can go look at that. And I actually someone posted it on a page the other day, and I saw it again, and I still kind of stand by what I said there. But the main thing for me is that I have a philosophy where I think there are certain things just that should be left alone, that should be done with minimal processing. And that would be my close mics, my kick mic, my snare mics, my toms, and my overheads should be like set up to get the best sound just without much processing. Very little EQ, very little compression, if any, and make sure that I just tune the drum kit and work with the drummer to get the sounds that are right for the song. And then I have the opposite of that, where I have mics that are set up specifically to get lots of compression or lots of distortion or crazy EQ or even distorted reverb sends or whatever to give the kit its character. And those things can then at mix be varied or eliminated or used exclusively, depending on what the mix calls for. But I really believe that you get better results when you don't mess around with the basics, when you just do the basics right and, use good, solid audio engineering principles on the basic stuff. Don't get fancy, and then have some other mics that you set up and some other tricks that you set up.
So how many mics might typically equal the mics that make up the basic?
Okay, so normally I would do like inside kick and then an outside kick mic, which I tend to mess with that one. If I want to do something with the kick drum, that's the one I will, filter or distort or gate or whatever I want. Snare top and bottom, hi-hat, a mic on each tom, and overheads, stereo overheads. And then I might add like an extra mic at the snare for like to trigger effects, or maybe like a mono room mic, usually a ribbon of some sort that's close up to the kit that I will compress or distort or both, heavy EQ or filtering. Sometimes I'll run that through an effects processor of some sort, tape delay, or I love old digital delays like PCM41s. They have a lot of character.
Now that mono mic, is there a big difference depending on whether you place it over on the floor tom side of the drums or over on the hi-hat snare side of the drums?
Yeah, there's a big difference. Usually I set it kind of a little ways away from the kit, usually about 3 or 4 feet away from the kit, below the ride cymbal, pointing at the snare drum, but on that floor tom side. Because I feel like that if you think about that, if you bend down in front of the kit and you're kind of at a 45-degree angle to the kick drum, you can see every drum from that point.
Oh, I love it. The photographer's analogy. I always like that one for recording.
Yeah, but the great thing about that position is that you get less hi-hat and you get less of the splash off from the bottom of the snare, that's why I've chosen that spot for that mic, is because those are two things that are very hard to control when you're really crushing something.
Yeah, that's the mid-range elements too,
Yeah.
right, that take over. All right, great. So awesome tips about the drum stuff, man. Really cool stuff.
Yeah.
Now, what about tuning the drums? What's the meaning of tuning the drums? If somebody is dealing with a drum kit that just sounds crappy, are there some sort of good, easy tricks that they might try out to improve the sound of the drums?
Yeah. What I did, I got very frustrated with getting bad drum sounds. So I decided to take it upon myself to learn how to do this. I started collecting cymbals because cymbals are a huge part of your overall drum sound, and most drummers don't buy good cymbals. So after that, I went and there was a drum shop in Portland where they make custom drums called Allegra. And I went there and started hanging out with a guy named Tony who would teach me how to tune drums. That was his job, to tune the drums there. And he taught me a lot. I went through and tried, various techniques. I've read about it online. I've watched a ton of YouTube videos. And then I just speak with drummers. And over time, I got to the point where I was pretty darn good at it, but this is one of those things where you can't just watch a video or read an article and be good at it right away. You have to train your ear and learn the technique.
Yeah. So now, is there one version of a drum kit that sounds great and that would just fit any song? And so depending on whether you're doing country, hip hop, or whatever, you just use that kit and it's going to be great?
Yeah, that's the myth. No, because as many different songs as there are that many different drummers, and there are that many different drum kits. And then in that kit, there's so many different variations. I mean, I'm kind of at a point now where I feel like as long as we have a kit that's working, like that has decent heads and is not, broken, I can probably find a way to make it sound musical.
Yeah.
But of course, you have to have a drummer that's going to cooperate. And it's a drummer who is musical.
Yeah.
And if, there are certain drummers, like especially here in Nashville, when I get hired on a session, if I show up and, Shannon Forrest or, Jerry Rowe or, Jeremy Latito, if they're playing, I really don't have to do much. We might say, hey, let's open up the kick drum a little bit, or can I get the snare a little deader, or maybe take it up a tick. But really, I don't have to do that much because I'm spoiled. I live in Nashville where the best musicians in the world are.
All right. So 2 questions and then we'll get away from drums. You once described to me the process of sitting at the kit and making sure that the kit sort of sounded good for what you envisioned in your head that the drum part might be for a song, and then miking it up and sort of closing that whole system of the way the kit sounded to you sitting at it and the way it sounds in the other room before the drummer even sat down. Is that sort of part of your process at all still? Obviously not with those guys, but.
Yeah. It all depends. There are certain records, like if you listen to the Ren's record, Heartache in a Song, that's something where I did all the tuning. The drummer on that, Jacob Arnold, is really a fantastic drummer. But we were purposely trying to take the musicians out of their comfort zone by doing things that were, like kind of contrary to what they usually have to do as studio musicians. Jacob was having to hit so soft that he was barely like lifting the stick to hit the snare drum. And I would go in and tune everything. And I'm someone who likes to tune to the key of the song. So I usually will ask like the guitar player or the piano player to just play softly while I'm tuning, so I can pick the right pitch for like rack tom and floor tom. And so I can get that snare that's usually either on the root or the fifth of the song.
And picking a pitch for a drum is literally like taking the drum key and tuning it up a little tighter or loosening it a little bit.
Yeah. And then, you have to work on things like the amount of decay that each thing has. Like a tom that has a long decay that's tuned low is gonna occupy a lot more sonic space than one that's tuned higher and just kind of goes away.
Yeah, you put a close mic on that and gain it up in your mix, and all of a sudden you have a 1-bar 808 going.
Yeah, exactly. So, but if you listen to that record, especially, there's a song on there called Crooked where they were going through the song, and I walked out on the studio floor and I said, guys, I've got an idea for this. Do you trust me? And they were like, yeah, okay. So I told the bass player to go home because we didn't need him that day, because I knew that we didn't need bass, and I had them slow it. I said, can you take the tempo of this down to like the slowest you can possibly humanly play it and still be musical? And then my concept for the drums on that was I wanted it to sound like they were broken and that we had recorded them fast and then slowed them down on tape. So I went in and I tuned everything down, got the heads on all the drums is like to the point where they were just floppy, and the bottom snares are just flopping really slowly, kind of in time with the music. And then I just put a lot of distortion on it and threw a blanket on the piano and ran it through a reverb. And then we recorded the song that way. And the mix sounds pretty much like it did on the floor that day.
That's cool, man. I like that. I love having that experimental vision when you're in the studio and having an opportunity to pursue it.
Yeah.
That's why it's a lot more fun sometimes to make records that might not be heard by as many people, but you were able to really be expressive artistically.
Yeah.
Than the ones that, maybe you're doing things quickly and it sounds like pop music and the most people listen to it. Yeah.
And, the truth is that a song like the one I just described is never going to be a hit. It's known. When you're making it, you know that this is not a hit, but it's meant to do something that's more important. And actually, the whole reason music was created by humans, and that is to express an emotion that words alone are not capable of expressing.
That's awesome. Well, dude, we're about to go into the jam session where I ask you a series of fast questions. But before we do, Rockstars, I want to remind you that you can find the links to all the things that Craig is talking about in the show notes. They're going to be at recordingstudiorockstars.com. You can also come join us in the Facebook group, which is facebook.com/groups/recording studio rockstars. Ask to be invited, and I'll just include you in the group. You can say hello to everybody. And then if you're listening to this on an iPhone right now, you can simply open the podcast app, find this episode playing, and I believe you'll see the logo there. If you touch the logo with your finger, it sort of disintegrates into the show notes, and all of a sudden you're looking at the show notes right there. You can just click right through. It'll take you to the website. It'll take you to Craig's site, and you can find out more about all the records we're talking about, see the videos and all that cool stuff. So we'll see you guys in just a moment for the jam session. Hey everybody, it's Lid Shaw, and I want to thank you so much for listening to this episode of Recording Studio Rockstars. I really appreciate you, and I really appreciate your time. And as a way of saying thank you, I've created a special mix tutorial just for you, Rockstars, totally free, called the Mix Master Bundle. With it, you get over 2 hours of detailed videos watching over my shoulder as I mix a song in my studio. Plus, I give you the free ebook that explains how I recorded the tracks And you get downloadable multitracks so that you can practice your mixes, including the Pro Tools session file, using nothing but stock plugins in Pro Tools, all of which you would find in any other DAW, whether you're on Logic or Studio One or Reaper. Maybe you're struggling with trying to improve your mix technique, or maybe you just simply don't have access to multitrack files or can't record a full drum set in your studio. I wanted to give you a chance to create your own mixes from full drum kit, bass, and guitars recorded in my studio. The song is called American Winter, and it's off my instrumental record Skadoosh, and it's all available for you totally free right now. All you need to do to get it is text Mix Master Bundle to 33444, and I'll send it directly to your email. Again, that's Mix Master Bundle with no space to 33444, or you can go directly to mixmasterbundle.com, enter your email, and I'll send all the files directly to you. Thanks so much, rock stars. We'll see you guys in the jam session. Cheers. Hello, rock stars. It's Lid Shaw with Recording Studio Rockstars. I'm back here with Craig Alvin. And Craig, we're going to go into the jam session. Are you ready to jam?
I am.
Awesome. Well, when you started out in recording and pursuing music as a career, what was holding you back from getting started?
I think it was that I wasn't focused. I wanted to play bass. I wanted to be in, several bands. I was doing too much stuff. I was in school trying to learn theology, and, I was just not focused on it. And it took a decision to stop playing in bands, to stop running live sound for everyone, to, get out of school and to just focus on recording. That was really what changed everything for me.
Well, it was a good decision that you made. Good for us. And
some days I think so.
Good for our ears. All right, so share with us some of the best advice you received. Maybe, you had some great tips from Joe Chiccarelli. Any other advice like that?
The very first time I walked into the studio and Joe was there, we were setting up drums, and this was the 24-track days, and we needed as many tracks as we could get. So when we were setting up drums, we decided to mix the overheads with the hi-hat and the tom mics. And I looked at him and said, we want to mix these now? And he looked at me like I was the biggest idiot in the world. And he's like, we're mixing right now. We're always mixing. Mixing is our job. And that was a huge revelation to me. The truth is, it doesn't matter. When you choose a mic, you're mixing. When you choose a location for that mic, you're mixing. When you choose a particular musician to play a part, you're mixing.
When you choose to wake up in the morning, you're mixing.
Yeah, it's all mixing. At least when you show up at the studio, from the time you walk in the door, you're mixing.
There's that great documentary, the VH1 classic album series, where they cover the making of Pink Floyd Dark Side of the Moon.
Yes.
And they show that the entire album was done on 16 tracks.
Yes.
And the drums took up a whopping total of 2 tracks, which was probably a bold move for them to even go stereo at that point.
Yeah.
So, mix it down.
They were always mixing.
Make a decision.
Make a decision, be happy about it. That he used to say that too. There's another bit of advice that I got. It kind of makes sense in kind of an Oklahoma way. I lived in Oklahoma for a couple of years, and my friend Ted, who spent some time in the music business and is a very successful restaurateur, he would always say in his Oklahoma way, the difference between whether something happened or didn't happen is whether it happened or not. And it makes no sense. But what he meant was, if something's not happening, like in a mix or on a session, if you choose to let it go by, then that's your choice. It didn't happen because you didn't make it happen. I think he would say to make you take responsibility for the situation.
Yeah.
And it's kind of silly, but I really think about that a lot.
Yeah. I mean, the idea of taking action when something's not working and making it right is really important. And I remember realizing when I was making records that a lot of what I did, and probably still do, is I used to say it's remove the suck. So you just go in and you start doing something, and you get better at it, but you start recognizing all the things that just don't sound good, and you just address them one at a time and get rid of them.
I was working on a record last year, and I showed up, and the producer was someone I knew very well. I didn't know the artist at all, and it was pretty clear that they were not prepared. And they were fantastic musicians, like surprisingly great, but the songs weren't there. And we struggled for 2 days. And I knew we were going to be there for a couple of weeks. And I finally just went to the producer and said, maybe I'm overstepping my bounds here, but it seems to me like you need to send all of us home and just sit with your artist and write. And this is someone I'd been working with for 15 years. So I had earned the respect to be able to say that. And he looked at me and he was like, "You're right." And so they stopped. They sent everyone home for 2 days, and they just finished the songs. And when we came back, it was great.
Wow.
It was great. But
you got a 2-day vacation.
Well, it wasn't much of a vacation. I mean, I was in a town where there wasn't much to do, but I sat in the hotel a lot. But the thing is like, it was going to keep going the way it was going. And I realized that in that instance, I had the ability to make something happen. And that was just simply by having a cup of coffee with the producer and going, you know what the truth is. I know what the truth is. It's your decision, but you know that this would be profitable. And he was like, yeah, you're right. That's the thing to do.
Isn't it the Einstein quote that the definition of insanity is to keep repeating the same action and hoping for a different result?
Yeah.
And eventually you just got to acknowledge that it ain't going to fix itself unless you do something.
And I mean, the same thing goes for like if a guitar player doesn't have his guitar in tune, why do you keep going with the take? If the singer has a sore throat that day, don't beat him into the ground and make him sing until they have no voice. Let them get better. If there's a hum in the bass amp, don't just record the bass with a hum, go fix it. And, if you get home and listen to a mix in your car and realize that you hadn't turned the lead guitar up loud enough on the solo, but you already sent it off to mastering, you have a choice. Do you turn around, go back to the studio and run a new mix and send that off to mastering, or do you let it ride? Yeah. And it really comes down to your commitment. And I'm telling you, the people who win at this are the people who are dedicated and will not let that shit pass.
That's awesome, man. That's intense advice, too. Well, so now, Craig, share with us a recording tip, hack, or secret sauce. And I want to ask you to lead it towards vocals and how you get a vocal track ready when you're mixing to have it really just sit as well as you can in a mix.
Okay. The first thing I do, I believe in the careful care and feeding of compressors. And what you'll notice is that a lot of times you get into Pro Tools and you look at the waveform and, it'll be very loud in the bridge and a little quieter in the chorus and very quiet in the verse. The first thing I do is just go through with clip gain. And I kind of even that out, like in a very general sense, so that it's kind of one volume the whole way. And
can you do any of that visually, or is it?
Yeah, you can do it visually. And that's how I do it. I try and get it all so that it's like more or less the same volume,
ballpark.
And the reason why is because I want the compressor and the other effects that I'm using to be more or less, in the butter zone there for the lead vocal.
Is that the name of your future studio, the Butter Zone?
The Butter Zone. I want it to be doing the right thing all the time. But the problem is that if it's too quiet, then it's not going to be quite there. And if it's too loud, then you're going to go too far. So I get it so that I can set my compressor once and leave it set. And then I just simply use automation to, turn the volume down in the verses and up in the chorus. And, after all that.
Yeah. So then for you rock stars, in case you didn't quite understand that means if you have one long wave file of vocal performance and it's got quiet bits and loud bits in it, you can actually go and chop it up into different sections and then just turn up the volume of that wave. Yeah. You can increase the gain. Clip gain in Pro Tools, I believe you have it in most DAWs, or you can just use the gain plugin and process it to be a little bit louder and a little quieter in sections.
Yeah. And then what I do after that is I usually will filter out any like low end rumble, any junk like that you don't want in the vocal. I go through and fix any like P's that, vocal pops. And I tend to use the RX plugin, or I like to use the linear EQ from Waves and just use those in Audio Suite. After that, the best thing I've learned for a vocal to get it to sit right is something we used to do with tape. And I have the UAD Studer plugin. And I'll run you down real quick my Craig Alvin custom vocal setting on that. It's 456 tape with the noise turned off. And then I run it at 7.5 inches per second. I turn the bias all the way up. And then I go and
does that make it brighter?
No, that makes it darker and it saturates it. I also turn it up to +9, so you get more saturation. And then I right above the bias, there's a high frequency tilt that's on the record side, and I turn that up to where the high end sounds right again.
Interesting.
And what this does is it gives you tape saturation, but that works in a really beautiful way with S's. Like you can get by with so much less de-essing, and it's probably the best sounding vocal compressor you're going to find.
Wow, that's cool. And that would be your whole vocal sound might go through that, or that's a parallel thing?
I will EQ, and then I'll hit that. I do this, with a plugin, so it's right on the track. And then I usually follow that with, some more compression or, whatever else I want after that.
And Rockstars, for these amazing tips that Craig is sharing with you, you can send him, he's going to give you his address to send him boxes of chocolates, bouquets of flowers, thank you notes. All right,
that trick works well on a lot of things. Try it on acoustic guitars. It'll, like, if you ever want to get that really nice, even, bright Nashville sound. It's
okay,
beautiful.
Killer, man. I love it. Because, listeners have been asking me, they've been saying, Lidge, we want more how-to tips. We want more hard, what can we use? And maybe a little less story. So thank you for including that. So now share with us a favorite hardware tool for the studio, something that you like to have around with you that if you're going to your studio, anybody's studio, it always seems to make the session better. Something that physical.
Man, I would say that you really can't underestimate the power of having like some good delays. Like in particular, I mentioned it once that PCM 41, which is by Lexicon, and they're kind of looked down upon because the PCM 42 is like supposedly the better version. But the PCM 41 has a sound, and I think this is important just in general to have bad gear laying around. Like studios in Nashville don't tend to have bad gear. And the great thing about having gear that's bad, like the PCM 41, is that it has built-in character. It has a sound that harkens to a particular era. And I love, like the PCM 41, I will turn the delay all the way off, but turn the mix all the way up and run acoustic guitar through it. So you can turn a really nice sounding, Martin guitar into a crappy old arch top that way.
That's cool.
And it sounds cool.
So you're not even using it for the delay, you're using it for the tone.
No, for the tone, yeah. And there's like a lot of old like Altec consoles or whatever have just these crazy, really kind of bad sounding mic pre's and EQs that are phasey and weird spring reverbs and stuff. And those things are fun for, recording percussion, like a tambourine with a massive Altec limiter and spring reverb on it is a wonderful, wonderful thing. I really wish that, like in Portland, when I was working there, we had all kinds of weird gear because that's really, it's all we had. But here in Nashville, everybody goes for like the really high-end, clean stuff, pristine stuff. And I find it a lot harder to get the sounds that I like with that stuff. So, and the great news is you can buy this stuff for cheap,
Well, so what's important to the process to be able to use all those things? Do you need to kind of have them plugged in ahead of time so that it's real easy to just send something?
Well, I mean, it's important to, to just mess around with stuff, and maybe if you're on a session, like a lot of the sessions that I do are actually the typical in Nashville where you got 2 hours and you're going to cut 5 songs. So I don't get time to play. I have to know, So yeah, if I think I want that, I will put that in the setup and just have it ready to go. But I think if you're just someone who's making records with friends, and you find some cheap stuff at the pawn shop. I mean, when I was working on the Features Wilderness record, one of the things I did was I just went around to pawn shops and bought all the old 12-bit audio gear I could find. And eventually, I found this thing called the Yamaha Rex 50, which is a 12-bit version of the SPX 90. And we all know that the SPX 90 is kind of grainy and not the best sounding, but I think that makes it cool. The 12-bit is that times 10, and that became really a big part of Mark's sound after that. He had to go out and find a couple of them because they're old and grumpy, and he always wants to have one. So when they tour, that he carries a couple along with him, so he has one and a spare.
That's cool, man. Great advice. And then a reminder again, it's not about you have to go out and find these exact same pieces of gear. It's that just look.
No, when I found that, I had never even heard of one. I was just exploring music stores, pawn shops, whatever I could find. And I saw it and went, well, this is weird. And it was $50. So
but don't be surprised if those go flying off the eBay shelves as soon as this episode goes live. All right. So now share with us a favorite software tool for the studio.
I just am completely in love with the UAD tape emulations, especially the Ampex and the Studer. But I found Echo Boy by Sound Toys. I'll tell you what I do with that. I turn off the delay, turn it all the way to 0, and I turn the mix all the way up. And then they have all these different ones you can go through. They have Echoplex, they have Space Echo, they have Cassette Deck, they have Telray, they have transmitter, they have FM radio, they have AM radio, they have all these different filtered sounds that essentially are what I was talking about with the weird audio gear. And you can vary them in all kinds of ways with EQ or whatever, but I do that all the time. I have settings like presets I've made for piano, for acoustic guitar, for background vocals, for I'm using a delay, but I'm not using the delay at all. All I'm doing, I'm treating it more like a channel strip, where I have built-in character. Mm-hmm. And that's something that I'm constantly doing.
Yeah. So you talk about saving presets. Is there any trick we might want to know about for how you effectively name presets and keep them organized? Or do you just kind of have a long list?
Usually what I'll do is I remember these things in context of the song. So like I have a setting on one that's Windy Streets bass, because I was mixing a song for an artist named Molly Marlette, and the song was Windy Streets. So now when I hear a song and I think, oh, I want that sound, I think, oh, I have to go find Windy Streets. And so I go find that, and I'll name those things kind of based on the context. I have a setting on a reverb called Adam Lester Magic, because there was a guitar player named Adam Lester, and I found this preset that just made his guitar come alive on a song. And I use Adam Lester Magic on a lot of guitars now.
That's cool, man.
Yeah.
I like it. It'd be a cool trip through your presets and all these bizarre names and everything. All right, so now share with us a favorite or like a great resource for the business side of recording studios, recording and making music, whether it's a tip for something online or a process or a person, whatever you want.
I'm not good with the business side. Honestly, the thing that's helped me the most is just getting management to do negotiation for me, because I always have these motivations where it's like, oh, but the music's really cool, and it would be nice to have just even a little money, because I'm still like a kid with this stuff. I love doing it. So I always sell myself too cheap. So now that I have management that does the negotiating for me, I don't sell myself too cheap.
Yeah. So I don't know. I guess if listeners can find management, but maybe the idea is it could even just be somebody else.
Yeah.
Anybody that can help. So, all right, now this is hypothetical, but let's say you were starting all over again, which you did when you moved to Nashville.
Yeah.
But in this sort of advice for somebody, a lot of listeners may find themselves in this boat right now, starting out. If you had to move to a strange city, you needed a simple recording studio setup to get started. You know, you didn't have a lot to spend on it, and you needed to find people to make music with and record, and you needed to make ends meet so that you could keep doing this and not have to quit and go do something else.
Okay, I've got an answer. I don't know that it's exactly what you're asking for, but this is what I would do if I was in that situation. I wouldn't think of gear yet. I would go find a job someplace where musicians gather, either a bar, coffee shop, maybe Lyft or Uber driver, someplace where you can meet the people who are making music. And I would save until I do a budget. You should have a budget. Do your budget and figure out how much money you need a month to live, and save until you have 3 months, living expenses saved up. Put that away. Do not touch it. Now, by this time, you've met the musicians. You know the scene. You know who the important ones are in the scene. Keep doing your job and get behind those people and push like crazy. I wouldn't even start charging for your work yet. I would just get behind them, do everything you can, help them record in their studios, help make their studios better, help the local studio out, engineer sessions for free, do live sound, help them unload after gigs, make sure their instruments are working correctly, set the intonation on their guitars, put some new heads on the drums, do that stuff, make yourself invaluable to that scene. And you will succeed. But you have to have the money in the bank first so that you don't go crazy and piss people off and start insisting on, them supporting you. Because the truth is, they can't support you yet. They're in the same boat you are. You have to realize that and put yourself in a position where you're able to help.
Yeah, you're almost creating your own internship.
Yes.
So I love that you suggested the Uber and Lyft driver technique, because what a brilliant idea. You could literally go, because I don't know, I don't do it, but I think you could go and just drive around the neighborhood where all the musicians live and wait for calls.
And you would
who
meet
knows,
them all.
maybe give them your number once they know you're a driver, and then get them to always call you when they need a ride.
Yeah.
Well, so that's great, man. All right, so last one. This one's the big doozy. What's the single most important thing our listeners can do to become a recording studio rock star themselves?
Practice mixing every day for hours a day. Like, seriously, get a hold of tracks, do everything you can to practice making them sound better, and listen and compare your mixes to mixes that are good, and just keep working on them until they sound as good as those mixes. And you have to discipline yourself and spend a lot of time doing this. It takes a lot of time, but once you do that, then you will have trained your ear to know what a good sound is. Most people I know who are, graduating from, school and then running off to work in the studio, they know a lot about things like gear. They can name like all the revisions of, an 1176 and what's good and bad about them, but they actually don't know what a good sound is. They don't know a good bass sound. They don't know a good snare drum sound. They don't know an appropriate kick drum sound, especially if they've only been exposed to one kind of music. If they've only listened to heavy metal and they're suddenly put on a country session, they're going to do this all wrong. You have to be constantly practicing, listening, comparing, doing it every day for a long time before you finally get to the point where you just know.
And it's training your ears so that when you put up a sound on your own speakers or you go to a new space and listen to a sound, you quickly can recognize whether the sound coming out of the speakers is the one that you have in your head that's appropriate for the song.
Yeah.
All right, Craig, thank you so much for being here on Recording Studio Rockstars. You totally rocked it.
Oh, thank you. It was great.
Can you tell our listeners how they can find you and learn more about your work?
Yeah, you can just find me on Facebook. Just look up Craig Alvin, Alvin, like the chipmunk, or craigalvin@gmail.com.
And that's Craig spelled with a W and an X?
Craig.
Okay. Awesome, dude. Well, thank you so much, man. It's been a massive pleasure. Thank you for putting in all the extra time and answering so many incredible, detailed questions.
Oh, man, my pleasure.
We will see you around the studio. Cheers, man. Thanks so much for listening to Recording Studio Rockstars. If you enjoyed the show and want to help make it better, please leave a rating and review on iTunes to help reach more people. You can click directly over to iTunes or go to recordingstudiorockstars.com/review for an easy explanation. And if you want more free content, all you have to do is text RS Rockstars to 33444. Again, that's RS Rockstars to 33444, and I'll keep you in the loop with articles, videos, and podcast updates. And I'll let you know about any upcoming giveaway offers, all totally free. Thanks for listening. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is Recording Studio Rockstars. Now, go make great music.